Wonderful, so wonderful is your unfailing love. Your cross has spoken mercy over me, over me. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart could fully know how glorious, how beautiful you are. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Powerful, so powerful, your glory fills the skies. Your mighty works displayed for all to see, all to see. The beauty of your majesty awakes my heart to sing. How marvelous, how wonderful you are. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with its love. 'Cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love. 'Cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Faithful love flowing down from the thorn-covered crown makes me whole, saves my soul, washes whiter than snow. Faithful love calms each fear, reaches down, dries each tear, holds my hand when I can't stand on my own. Faithful love, from above, came to earth to show the Father's love. And I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face. And Jesus is his name. Faithful love is a friend just when hope seems to end. Welcome face, sweet embrace, tender touch filled with grace. Faithful love, endless power, living flame, spirit's fire, burning bright in the night, guiding my way. Faithful love, faithful love from above, came to earth to show the Father's love. And I'll never
welcome back, everyone. We continue making our way through Psalms. This week coming to Psalm 45, which is quite different from some of the others. If you've already read it in anticipation of taking a brief look at it today, you may have noticed that it's not the same as the other Psalms that we've studied up to this point. This one, I guess the prevailing description that I've found for it, and it certainly fits, is that of a royal wedding psalm. If you're reading this, particularly the first part, and you kind of pick up a little bit of a Song of Solomon kind of a feel to it, you would not be alone in recognizing that. The superscription notes to the chief musician upon Shoshanim, for the sons of Korah, a mashil, a song of loves. So some of that we've seen in previous psalms. We talked about the sons of Korah, a mashil, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Upon Shoshanim. So the JPS version notes that the word roughly means lilies. And as I noted, there's definitely a similar kind of imagery and language here to what you find in Song of Solomon. So in Song of Solomon, if you aren't terribly familiar with it, lilies, flowers in general, tend to have for lack of better words, an erotic context, and so it's generally believed that is the same type of a context here, in terms of a husband and a wife being wed, and that reference in the superscription alludes to that. So again, a wedding psalm. Now, the big question obviously would be, about whom is this written, and we'll talk about three possibilities. The subject isn't named outright, the groom or the bride, and so it's generally believed, as is noted by multiple commentators. This serves a useful purpose, because then the same psalm could be used on multiple occasions, right? So if you have an Israelite king and bride, or a king being wed, you have this particular text that could be used to fit multiple different circumstances. About whom is it originally written, right? So who was the subject that the psalmist initially had in mind? Some would say, and it should come as absolutely no surprise, David, right? Because I think sometimes I get the impression that because David is so closely associated with the Psalms, and indeed most of the Psalms that we've looked at up to this point, and we'll see plenty more of them beyond, explicitly name David as the author, or he's mentioned in the superscription. So I can certainly understand why that would be kind of the go-to answer. But there's nothing here that directly suggests David. As we noted with some of the other Psalms, sometimes there is. Sometimes even if he isn't mentioned by name, either in the Psalm itself or in the superscription or the inscription, there are some context clues that kind of point to certain circumstances in his life. And you say, well, even though it doesn't name him, we can kind of see how this fits. Personally, I don't really see that being the case so much here. I don't see any clues that would strongly suggest that. It's also been pointed out, Brother Waycaster notes this, Psalm 6 in particular, and I suppose you could also say 17 at the end of the Psalm, don't fit David, because like all human kings, his kingship, his throne was finite in nature. And this psalm speaks of a throne that is going to last forever and ever. So, of the three possibilities, the first one, David. Some commentators say, I see no reason to think that. The second possibility And we kind of just alluded to this. It's Brother Waycaster's take, and certainly a really good reason to think this one, is that the psalm is purposefully messianic in its import. Looking forward to this King of David's line that the prophets speak of, who will have an everlasting throne. And of course, speaking of Christ, and I say there's a really good reason to think that because 2 verses from this psalm are quoted in Hebrews. Verses 6 and 7 are quoted by the Hebrews writer in Hebrews 1, 8 and 9, and there it is applied to Christ. And it's kind of like a couple of weeks back, it's been a few weeks at this point, but we talked about how when you have in the New Testament quotations from Psalms, you kind of have different situations sometimes happening with them. In this case, it could very well. So, 2 possibilities. One, that's what the psalmist has in mind as he's writing this, hundreds of years before the 1st century AD. He's thinking of Christ and the church as his bride. That's one possibility. Another possibility would be you have the Hebrews writer citing God, speaking of the Son in that occasion in Hebrews, using the same verbiage that you find in Psalms so that the reader makes the connection, especially, which makes sense to me, given the book of Hebrews in the New Testament being written specifically to Hebrew Christians, trying to convince them not to abandon the faith. And I, for one, suspect that's the case here. So is it about David? Is it about Christ? I see no reason to think it has anything to do with David. Again, others would disagree. You have the Hebrews reference to Christ, although I'm personally not convinced that it was originally written with that intent, even though it later picks up that verbiage and that context in the New Testament. And part of the reason I would say that is, some would say, well, it isn't David because he never had an everlasting throne, right? Verse 6 doesn't fit David. You could also say, by the same token, verses 9 and 10 don't fit Jesus. Even if you do take the verbiage, the idea that you find in 6 and 7, and you find it there in Hebrews in application to Christ. So, who's the third possibility? The third possibility, and from what I can gather, the consensus, certainly among Jewish scholars, is that this is a particularly old psalm and originally written. Now, again, as I noted, this is speculation, but again, the leading contender amongst the scholarly crowd. It's originally written in reference to Ahab, the king of northern Israel. Why might they say this? Well, Ahab famously married Jezebel, a Phoenician princess, and you have an allusion to a daughter of Tyre, king's daughter, clothing of wrought gold, which again would seem to suggest a strong association with Phoenicia, with the bride on that occasion. We have reference to a palace that's inlaid with ivory. 1 Kings 22. Ahab is known for having built just such a palace. And there's also a suggestion that the verb of you love, ahavta, is a pun or a play on the very name Ahab. So even some of the verbiage and the subject matter and the language that's used is, you kind of have this indirect, kind of a linguistic allusion to him as the subject. So three possibilities there. As we pointed out at the very outset, the specific subject is not named by the psalmist. Nowhere in here does he say, what I'm writing is about David, or it's about Ahab, or it's about the Messiah, the anointed one, or certainly doesn't name Jesus specifically. But again, different reasons, different thoughts for the three. Because the king and bride are not named, again, you have something that could work in multiple circumstances. Again, anytime a royal wedding comes along, you've got something here that could be used in that situation. Or, again, as the Hebrew writer notes, some of the same verbiage is used and applied to Christ. Okay, so Psalm 45. My heart, and again, as I said at the very, very beginning, as we start working our way through this, if you're listening to this and it kind of feels a little Song of Solomon-ish to you, you're not alone. My heart is inditing a good matter. I speak of the things which I have made touching the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. Thou art fairer than the children of men. Grace is poured into thy lips. Therefore God hath blessed thee forever. Gird thy sword upon thy thigh, O most mighty, with thy glory and thy majesty. And in thy majesty ride prosperously because of truth and meekness and righteousness. And thy right hand shall teach thee terrible things. Thine arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies, whereby the people fall under thee. So this hyperbolic, over-the-top language talking about how magnificent and comely and powerful this king is. And you may be thinking too, we talked about the possibility, the consensus even, that originally this may have been about Ahab, again because of the references to Phoenicia and to ivory palaces in particular. It misses the mark somewhat, talking about his righteousness and truth and meekness, because of course Ahab is known for anything but those things. But again, if what we're talking about here is a psalm that's somewhat a bit more generic and purposefully over the top and intended to be used in an Israelite royal wedding ceremony, it's I don't know. That certainly does not fit Ahab. Just as verses 6 and 7, again, the reference to in Hebrews 1, 8, and 9 don't so much fit David, even though they do fit Christ. It says, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter. Thou lovest righteousness and hatest wickedness. Again, not Ahab. Therefore God thy God hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. And again, that bit, 6 and 7, that's what the Hebrew writer cites. And to my knowledge, the only New Testament allusion in this particular psalm. All thy garments smell of myrrh and aloes and cassia out of the ivory palaces whereby they have made thee glad. Again, that ivory palaces reference is one of the northern kingdom clues that some would find here. King's daughters were among thy honorable women. Upon thy right hand did stand the queen in gold of Ophir. Hearken, O daughter, and consider, and incline thine ear. Forget also thine own people and thy father's house. So shall the king greatly desire thy beauty, for he is thy Lord, and worship thou him. And the daughter of Tyre shall be there with a gift. Even the rich among the people shall entreat thy favor. The king's daughter is full of glorious within. Her clothing is of wrought gold. And again, these references, if this is Ahab, then these references would originally, even though again they could be used universally for any woman marrying an Israelite king. If the scholars are right, it would originally be a reference to Jezebel of all people. Again, which would not some of the praise would certainly not be befitting. But like I said, if the eternal throne piece doesn't necessarily fit David, then the rest of the psalm that comes after verse 7 doesn't so much fit Jesus in terms of his literal life. So take from that what you will. The king's daughter is all glorious within. Her clothing is of wrought gold. She shall be brought unto the king in raiment of needlework. The virgins, her companions that follow her, shall be brought unto thee. Again, it's a wedding scene. It's what's being described throughout. With gladness and rejoicing shall they be brought. They shall enter into the king's palace. Instead of thy fathers shall be thy children, whom thou mayest make princes in all the earth. I will make thy name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore shall the people praise thee forever and ever. Again, as I said before, we were talking about verse 6, and does it apply to David? I also mentioned verse 17. Does it apply to any Israelite king? Not literally, unless you're taking it in the hyperbolic sense that practically everything else in the psalm seems to be written. We'll praise you forever and ever and ever. Doesn't mean he's going to live forever and ever and ever. Again, unless unless you have the psalmist intending this as a messianic psalm from the very beginning, rather than having particular language from the psalm that gets recontextualized in a New Testament context. So that is Psalm 45. The thing that makes it stand out is the subject matter, the content, the context. I don't think we've come across a psalm quite like this up to this point. It's different in terms of what it's talking about. The language is certainly quite different, and it's somewhat interesting for those reasons. And again, the quote that we find in Hebrews chapter 1. So that is Psalm 45. Lord willing, we will continue on our way, Psalm 46, next time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again?